Hey everybody, before we start the show, I wanted to let you know about a sponsor for this week's episode of Tabletop Babble. I'm talking about Kobold Press. Kobold Press, the makers of the Midgard campaign setting, Deep Magic, and the Tome of Beasts. And now the Tome of Beasts has a sequel that is on Kickstarter called the 5e Creature Codex. It is a hardcover monster book with over 300 monsters and beautiful full-color art. If you love the Tome of Beasts, and you should, it is an amazing, amazing supplement. It is basically the greatest, most awesome monster expansion for D&D there is. Well, now there's gonna be another one. 300 new monsters, Lotus Golems, Wasteland Dragons, Shadow Goblins, and so much more. And what's even better about it for yours truly is that I have a couple of monsters in it. So you should definitely go and check it out. All Creature Codex Kickstarter backers can submit an original monster for design for possible publication. That is pretty awesome. And high-level backers can commission Kobold Press to design and illustrate their monster idea. This thing is already well over 200% funded. It is blowing past stretch goals and backer goals. You should definitely check it out. In addition to the Codex, the Kickstarter will fund the creation of monster pawns, encounter maps, and so much more. You do not want to miss out on this. It is going to be an amazing deal. I promise you, Tome of Beasts was the best Kickstarter I ever contributed to, and I am sure the Creature Codex is going to pay off just as much, if not more. Head on over to Kickstarter and search for the Creature Codex or Kobold Press, or head on over to don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com and click on the banner on the left that says Tome of Beasts 2, and it will take you directly to the Creature Codex Kickstarter from Kobold Press. This is Tabletop Babble. I'm James Introcaso. Today on the show, I am talking to three amazing game designers who have all worked on the new Kobold Press release, the Creature Codex. Check it out. It is a sequel to the amazing Tome of Beasts. It's going to give us over 300 brand spanking new monsters for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. And who are those designers I'm talking to? Well, they've all been on this show before. The amazing Dan Dillon, the incomparable James Haeck, and the magnificent, marvelous, mad wizard Merwin himself, Shawn Merwin. Let's get to that conversation right now. Okay, everybody, I am now here with three of my favorite people and game designers. I am super, super excited to have this conversation about the Creature Codex from Kobold Press. We have three of the designers here. So why don't we go around the table and you can let people know who you are and what you do in the world of RPGs. And let's start with Shawn Merwin. I was going to give you a cute Mad Wizard nickname, but then I couldn't think of anything better than what Chris Nesack gives you every week down with D&D. So.
Yeah, I'll take that small introduction. I'll take 10 extra seconds to talk here. My name is Shawn Merwin, as James so astutely figured, and I have been working in D&D and RPG freelance for about 20 years now. I am one of the Guild Adepts, as is Mr. Introcaso, and I contributed, as did the other two gentlemen, to the book that we are talking about today.
Awesome. Well, it is great to have you here, and Shawn has a list of credits longer than all of my skin flayed from my body and stretched out. Good visual about all the work he has done. Someone else who has many, many credits to his name, Dan Dillon. Welcome back. It's good to have you. Who are you and what do you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games?
Well, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me back on again. So, as you said, I am Dan Dillon. I'm a freelance game designer, and what I do is I write stuff. I've done a heck of a lot of work for Kobold Press, along with just kind of a quick cross-section of other third-party publishers. I had the distinct pleasure of writing an Adventurers League con-created content adventure for Gen Con with Mr. Merwin here as my handler on that project. That was a great time. I'm working on some upcoming official Adventurers League content for Season 7, so that's exciting. I've been around a bit.
Yeah, you have. You certainly have been around a bit, so it is awesome to have you here chatting with us, of course,
You bet.
about monster design once again, because I think I've had you on some previous shows to talk about monsters.
A couple times, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if we've ever had a tabletop babble monster design conversation. So, and of course, last but not least, James Haeck, welcome to Tabletop Babble. Why don't you let the people out there know who you are and what you do in the world of tabletop RPGs? A person very young, but still with credits that could cover the front and back of my skin. Welcome.
Hey, it's great to be here. Great to be back on the show. I'm James Haeck, and I got my start doing stuff for Kobold Press, and turns out I'm back with them again with work on the Creature Codex. And somewhere in the middle of there, I did work with Geek and Sundry and Matt Mercer and Green Ronin and Wizards of the Coast and a couple of other folks in there too. But Kobold Press is where I got my start, and I'm happy to be with them again.
Excellent. Yeah, we'll just blow by those other people. Jeez. So let's jump right into it. We probably all know about the Tome of Beasts at this point. The Tome of Beasts is a big, beautiful monster book that was created for 5th edition D&D from Kobold Press. Over 400 new monsters. It came out before Volo's Guide to Monsters, and in my mind is the Monster Manual 2 of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. It's an excellent book, so excellent that they decided to make a sequel called the 5e Creature Codex. So at the time of this recording, it is already well over 200% funded. We're a little over 24 hours into the Kickstarter at this point. So
Crazy.
Congratulations to all of you for that amazingness. And I think a lot of the excitement for this comes from the fact that Tome of Beasts is such a quality product. I use it all the time. It's part of my DM go bag whenever I'm on the run. So it's an excellent, excellent thing to have. Let's talk a little bit about the Creature Codex. So, Dan, I know you were involved in both. What were some of the design challenges going in to make another new 300 creatures?
Well, sure. I mean, I think you just hit it on the head there. The operative word is another. So you want to make sure that you're not treading the same space that you've already worked on before, right? You want to make sure that you have new, interesting ideas that aren't just filler. Sometimes I don't know how Wolfgang does it, but that man is a font of ideas, and he's been able to come up with so many prompts and suggestions and so many more that just haven't been used yet that are still floating around out there. So who knows what's going to come next? But yeah, that's always the tricky part, is to make sure that you're coming up with new, interesting, useful stuff that isn't just stretching to fill page count. And thankfully, watching these stretch goals roll on the Kickstarter, stretching to fill page count is not a problem.
That's excellent. That's really, really cool. So I will then pose this question to all of you, because you have all created monsters, not just for this product, but in all of the other products you've worked on, adventures, other monster compendiums, perhaps for other publishers and things like that. When you sit down to design a monster that is new, what is the first step? What is the first thing that you need to do? And I'll start with you, Shawn. What is the first thing you do when you sit down to design a monster?
This piggybacks on to what Dan was saying, but the first thing you do, or at least the first thing I do, is decide what's needed. What is not in the game right now that people need? It could be more of a certain kind of humanoid monster. If you want an all hobgoblin encounter and there is a lack of ranged hobgoblins, then that's what gets worked on first. If it is something more story oriented, where there haven't been a lot of Arctic adventures, so let's start looking at some ice monsters, then that's where you go. So with this project, I started with the big long list that Wolfgang sent us, and thought, okay, what's going to be cool here? Well, every single thing that he sent me was cool. So I just picked as many as I could and started going through the list, seeing what I was most interested in. And those are the monsters I chose. So that's the very, very first thing, is just where does it fit in either the game needs or the cool overall story you're trying to tell.
I love that. Yeah, I think that's a thing that I have learned too, is that I will often sit down to make something and then realize it has already been made. And so, great, right? That's excellent. I'm like, good, this work has already been done. I can use this for my game. Or I can reskin this fire elemental into a lava elemental and I'm good to go, right? I think there are certainly things to be said about why are you making the creature and what new thing are you bringing to the game. I really, really love. James, what about you? When you sit down to make a creature, once you've determined sort of that, yes, this is something new and fresh and I'm ready to make it, where do you start?
The first thing that I ask is the first thing I ask when I do any writing, and that's the question, so what? Why the hell am I making this monster? And if the answer isn't because I really want to, then I chose the wrong monster to work on. Or if I absolutely have to do it, then I need to find something cool about it that I can really fall in love with. I think the most fun monsters to work on in the Creature Codex are the ones that have some sort of folkloric root, because there's some history that I can delve into, I can dig into. And every monster in the 5e Monster Manual has some story attached to it. That's my favorite part of the Monster Manual. It has a story, maybe a mini adventure hook or 3 in there. And by delving into the roots of the folklore, I can find all those old stories that were told. And I can either bring them up verbatim and have something classic for Dungeon Masters to work off of. Classic is good. Cliches are cliches for a reason, and they work in D&D. Or if it doesn't work in the modern day for whatever reason, or if I don't think it's quite as interesting in a D&D adventure, there are plenty of stories that don't work in D&D adventures, then I can tweak it. There's one monster that I love a lot, and I don't think anyone will mind if I spoil it a little bit, that is called the Unku Dragon. And I've never heard of an Unku Dragon before, and it turns out that the creature itself is based off an old Breton myth of the Grim Reaper. And the dragon part is new. The Unku is just a human skeleton in some robes, very Grim Reaper-like, but in a very Celtic, Bretonish sort of way. And how can I marry that old, interesting, grim mythology with the fantastical idea of a dragon? And all the ideas spiraled out from that.
That's amazing, because for me, I feel like I am so the opposite. So I also worked on a couple of monsters for the book. And when Wolfgang sent me a list, I tried to look for monsters that I thought was like, okay, I can make up whatever I want to about this thing, because I am afraid of, and maybe the internet has scarred me in some way, I'm afraid of getting it wrong. I'm afraid that I will look at the wrong source or get the wrong source. And luckily, one way to do that is to do more than just cursory research, right? You should do a deep dive and enjoy it, have fun reading about a really weird creature. And the other thing is, I would say that the Kobold Press team is like a weird Wikipedia of monsters, starting with Wolfgang Bauer and going down, which is also pretty cool. And so I did find myself drawn then towards, I thought, like, let me get out of my comfort zone. Let me try something different that isn't just like, hey, look, it's a weird skeleton, so I can say whatever I want about this weird skeleton. That was really, really fun. And I think I agree with you about story. I think story hooks are one of the ways we can really make monsters unique. And I do think as designers, we get so involved in the mechanics sometimes we forget about that, which was told to me by one Dan Dillon long ago during a monster design workshop. So Dan, where do you start when you're looking at a monster and you've decided, okay, this is unique and I feel like I need to make this? What's the next step?
Well, for me, I'm sure I've said this before. For me, I'm very visual. I love movies. I love visual representation of things. So I try to find an image of the thing, like assuming that I have nothing. A lot of times we'll have a little blurb like, oh, this is a demon that should have crazy blue fire in its giant mouth, and it does this thing. And like, okay, well, that's something to go off of. If we have that, that makes life a lot easier because that's a nice starting point for it to go. But I always try to think of what is one cool, awesome thing that this thing is going going to do? Either the image you see of it when it first breaks into the scene, or what is the thing it's going to do in the fight that's going to make players go, gah, and not want to fight that thing again. And so I try to get that image in my head, and then it's pretty easy for me to take that image and jump from that aesthetic to something in a mechanic. So that's where I start, right? I try to come up with that one hook of a wow factor for the movie playing in my head while I'm playing Dungeons and Dragons, and then I try to translate that to the page.
I love that because it becomes I find it's always easier to design when you know what you're designing, right? As opposed to sitting down and saying, "Let me give this thing a cool ability," and I don't know what it is, and saying
right.
This breathes fire, and then figuring out how that works is always a lot easier.
Exactly. Yeah. If you're just sort of throwing stuff together, it'll feel cobbled together at the end, generally. So I like having that unified idea up front and then just letting it grow from there.
And to piggyback on what Dan was saying, DMing can be very hard. And with the wrong group, DMing can become a drag. And to have a really fun monster to play can make DMing more fun. So when you're creating a monster, you want to bring that joy to the DM, whether it be being able to tell the cool story behind it or to be able to do the cool thing on the grid during the battle. To bring that joy to the DM will not just fulfill you as the monster creator, but extend the hobby and bring more DMs into the game.
Absolutely. And there was mention before of the lore sections, the story sections in the monster manual. That is easily one of my favorite parts of the 5th edition core books, by the way, is you can look at those lore headings, and they're usually like 2, maybe 3 words that just sort of summarize whatever that next paragraph is going to be. You could just toss out the paragraphs and remember those couple pairings of words, and you have a primer on how to do, how to use, how to run, how to play and portray and characterize this thing. And that is perfect. And that's something that I try to keep in mind for when I'm writing monsters for a 5th edition entry. I try to make sure that those headings are going to be quick hooks for the DM to grab on and go, especially if they have to flip something out on the fly.
Yeah, if you're writing them and you're familiar with other RPGs, think of fate aspects.
Yeah, there you go.
You can make them like fate aspects. Then you're telling the DM everything that they need to know right from the start.
I think a perfect example of that, by the way, just the one that always sticks in my head is the Red Dragon. So folks, if you're listening, go check out the Red Dragon entry in the Monster Manual and just read those little aspects of the Red Dragon to go ahead and run with that term. And that tells you exactly what you need to know, the outline of how to play this dragon at the table.
Yeah, it's so useful. Those little inlined subheads. Or italic and bolded descriptors, right?
Yeah.
I love thinking about them as fate aspects too. That's really, really fun, and also helps you easily convert 5e monsters into fate. So,
hey, fancy that.
So, as we get into our mechanics, right, Dan, you had mentioned at the beginning, coming up with something new is hard, and as Shawn mentioned, you have to ask yourself why you're making it. And as James mentioned, you have to ask, so what? So once we get to that point of, okay, this is a new monster I want to make, I've got the story, it's going to be amazing. And then I make it and I realize, oh no, like maybe the story is different, but mechanically I've made a direwolf, right? Is that a problem? Is that an issue that I have done that? Or is that okay? And the story can really still drive the monster. Shawn, I see you shaking your head.
As a DM, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Mm-hmm. You can just take a direwolf, change its features, use the exact same stat block, and your players are still going to be surprised because your description of it doesn't say direwolf. Your description of it says something completely new. As a monster creator who is going to sell products somewhere, then you really don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Although obviously using a monster as a base and then working out from that is completely fine and a great way to get your feet wet or to get started. But then you're going to want to move further and further away as you create stranger and more wonderful things.
And in many ways, that's super easy because 5e has a rather simple mechanical chassis for monsters compared to other editions of D&D at the very least. And if you wanted to take a dire wolf and have it be your basis for your, I don't know, dog of evil, then you can just take those stats and tweak them by a little bit. And then from there, the single most important thing you can do when you're using a monster's inspiration is to, like Dan said, find that one cool thing. Any given monster in any edition of D&D has a lifespan of maybe 3 to 5 rounds of combat. And as long as you find one cool thing so that it stands out, and so that especially DMs can easily figure out what that one cool thing is and not get bogged down in reams and reams of text, then you are on the fast track to success.
And I think that's the key, is you shouldn't feel like you need to develop 6 new amazing features for your monster, right? If you can develop one cool thing, that makes it really interesting, especially if you're dealing with creatures that your players are going to encounter more than one of, which are sort of the most interesting combats. I am remembering a creature from the first Tome of Beasts that could increase its weight, and so it would grapple onto players and then suddenly become much heavier. I can't remember the name of that creature, but it was awesome and such a simple mechanic, right? You basically had disadvantage on your attack rolls while it was grappling you. Right. But so evocative and so cool and weird and scary. And Dan, I see you nodding your head. Are you agreeing with everything you're hearing here?
Oh, yeah, totally. And I did want to underscore something that Shawn said, in that there's a difference between writing a monster for publish and using a monster, right?
Yeah.
Reskinning and having a thing that is essentially, functionally the same as a direwolf or goblin. If you're writing an adventure, that's fine. It doesn't matter. If you're using it at the table, that's fine. When you're writing it for someone else to give you money to use this thing to be inspired, not fine. And like you said, it doesn't have to be like both James has just said, it doesn't have to be this giant golf bag of new stuff that no one's ever seen or heard of before. That can often work against you by making it a little difficult to play and run, and you have to study up on them beforehand, or you end up flipping at the table to remember what this weird trait does. So giving a monster one unique thing and then also using some of the tried and true standards, there's nothing wrong with giving a new monster pack tactics like a kobold or a wolf. That's okay, certainly if it fits their theme. And there's just so many ways to mix and match all of these traits and recombine them in different ways that creates a new experience.
Yeah, I think that's very true, right? I am always adding the amorphous feature from oozes because it's a terrifying thing to me. So yeah, I agree. And so on that line of that, the difference between publication and monsters that you might just run at your table, Kobold Press does this amazing thing that whenever they put out one of these books, they invite all of their backers to submit a monster, and then they might pick, a handful of entries, the best entries, and make those monsters in the book. And usually they're stretch goal dependent. Like they might take more monsters the more money they get because they'll have the space in the book to print them.
Specifically in this campaign, it's number of backers. The more backers we get on the campaign, there's going to be more backer monsters accepted into the book.
That's awesome. That's great. And there's already over 1,000 backers, right, on this thing?
Over 500.
Yeah, I don't think we're quite to 1,000 yet, but yeah.
But 1,000 is a milestone. Once we hit 1,000, we'll have more monsters from backers in the book.
Yep.
That's awesome.
Don't go anywhere. There's more Tabletop Babble coming up.
Hey there, Alex Basso here.
And Rudy, co-hosts of Game O'Clock.
Don't split the podcast network's premier video game show.
Every month, the two of us and a special guest go through a game genre's history, some of our favorites within it,
some of our least favorite games, and where we hope the genre goes moving forward. We've talked about shooters, MOBAs, classic adventure games, and even more.
If you like video games, you gotta check us out.
All right, back to the show.
So I, as listeners of this podcast know, because I talk about it incessantly, I had a monster in the Tome of Beasts because I backed the Tome of Beasts, and then I submitted a monster, and it was awesome, and it was amazing. And so I'm wondering, what advice do you have for people who are submitting their first monster for publication as part of this? What sort of things should they be doing as they get into this? And my first recommendation is going to be, go read the Tome of Beasts. See how those monsters are laid out and do some research.
Check out this little monster. If I just pick one at random, called the Corpse Mound, and see how that one worked out, and see if that inspires you or gives you a good template.
It would be hard to achieve such brilliance. But you might try. One might try.
It's a good platonic ideal.
Right, exactly. That's where I peaked. But so what are some pieces of advice you all might have for various people who are going at this for the very first time?
I would suggest, and this is how I learned to design D&D, is other than merely playing D&D, which is a great tool, figuring out how things work in play is awesome, is to do a deep, close reading of your D&D monster books, not just the Monster Manual and Volo's Guide, but also really good, big third-party ones like, say, the Tome of Beasts. And try and reverse engineer them. Look at that table in the Dungeon Master's Guide about building monsters. Try and get into the designer's headspace and ask yourself, why the hell did the designer do that? Why is this ability a good fit for this monster? Is there a narrative connection? And once you can start creating ideas of why some other designer did something, you can start using those ideas in your own design. And suddenly your own design it's not just copying other designers, but it's been through the synthesis of your own mind. And you'll start creating your own unique ideas.
That's just some great advice, is to read books on design and stuff. I think is just so valuable.
And hell, read other books. Read your folklore books too.
Oh, yeah.
Figure out what makes people tick.
Yeah, definitely. How about you, Dan? Do you got any advice for people?
Yeah, sure. Well, I've got a real quick one. So one of the things is I had the pleasure of being the judge, one of the judges on the backer submissions for the monsters for Tome of Beasts 1, and let me just throw this out there real quick, and then we'll kick it over to whatever Shawn might have. I'm sure he's got some great monster design advice. If we give you something along the lines of a word count, please use the word count. Don't come in half to 2/3 of the word count used. You're wasting your opportunity if you do that. And don't blow way over the word count. Don't freak out if you're 10 words over, but don't send us 1,000 words if we ask for 500. That is going to make it highly unlikely that I slog through your entire entry. Let's see. We had several thousand backers on Tome of Beasts 1, and not everyone submitted a monster, but I'm sure you can imagine there were a hell of a lot of them that we had to pick through. They're coming in, plus 70, 80, 90, 100% word count. I'm sorry. We gave you guidelines. You blew them. Can't do it. I've got too much to do and people who actually follow the guidelines. So please follow the guidelines.
I think plus or minus 5% is always
it's a good rule of thumb. That won't bother anyone.
Go ahead, Shawn.
This is basically just general publishing advice, which is, as someone who sits and reads through a slush pile, which is an old journalistic term, but it's basically what Dan just described, is do something different. Do something that not everyone is doing. And, generally, if I was an editor on a project, I would give the opposite advice. So, I would say, do no harm, try to keep, have cool ideas, but keep it within I would go completely the opposite for this, because this is kind of the 1 in 1,000 shot. If someone's reading them, you want right from the start to glow, to shine.
Yeah.
So do something bold, do something that will grab someone's attention. And if I could give better advice, I would be writing these monsters myself. So do something just that's way out there.
Bold is good. Bold is good. Silly is not.
True.
True. Do not send us parodies. They will get ones across the board and never advance. Yeah. You're wasting our time if you're doing that, quite frankly.
It's also a first impression, right? Dan Dillon is a guy you want to know. He's a guy who, even if your thing is too weird, which I think is a hard thing to do when it comes to Kobold Press monsters, but if it's a thing that is a bold statement and impresses and the math is right and you don't have a lot of you have no typos. Sorry.
No typos is delightful. Spell check is your friend.
it might be a thing where it says, hey, this wasn't right for this project, but this stood out to me and I'm going to remember this. Or, hey, you dropped a lot of F-bombs in your copy and didn't follow the format. And you remember that guy too. So
Yeah.
Here's one more piece of general monster building advice, and this isn't mechanical, or this is more narrative in nature, but the way to make monsters stand out is to pick something that personally scares or inspires you. If your monster doesn't have an emotional resonance with you, you won't write it very well at all.
Mr. Introcaso's oozes.
Yeah, and this inspiration can come from everywhere and anywhere. A lot of my friends in Southern California right now are faced with a wall of fire eating up their state. And I looked at that and I thought, damn, that's one, awful. And two, I would be terrified of a monster that made me think of a massive forest fire.
Yeah.
And I could very easily impart that emotion into my writing. And that inspires cool abilities too.
yeah, absolutely. Right. Like certainly we know about monsters that burn, but what is the forest fire monster like?
Mhm.
That is.
Yeah. How is that different than just a big fire elemental? And there's a lot of ways you can go with that.
Shawn, that actually makes me think about you. There is a specific Shawn Merwin question, which is that on the Kickstarter for the 5e Creature Codex, you are specifically called out as a designer of undead. And I am wondering, now that we know that you picked a lot of creatures from a list, what is it about undead, Shawn, that draws you?
Really, it's not just the undead, but it's the undead that Kobold Press do, because they are so unique, having their own sense of intelligence in their own nation and their own hierarchy. Really gives you a lot of room to play and to do undead in a way that no other D&D game can really do it. So that's why I was drawn specifically to the undead monsters that were on the list I chose from.
And that actually reminds me of another piece of advice is if you're designing for a publisher, also get to know that publisher's other stuff, right? So sure, read Tome of Beasts, but maybe check out the Midgard campaign setting before you submit your monster and say, this would fit right in your world, Wolfgang.
Or even just skim the go to the Kobold Press store or your favorite online retailer that has their stuff and just read the product descriptions. If you submit a science fiction or space fantasy monster to Kobold Press, not exactly what KP does. So highly unlikely that is going to be picked to be showcased in one of those products.
The very first thing I ever submitted to Kobold Press was they had a design contest, actually, which is different, but I would say similar to what they're doing right now with the Creature Codex. And it was for a contest they called Lethal Lairs. And it eventually became part of the Book of Lairs, which they published sort of parallel with the original Tome of Beasts as a partner. And they gave a prompt, a one-paragraph prompt. So I kind of already had a leg up on people designing from scratch because I had something to work off of. But basically what they said is this is set in the Southlands campaign setting. It involves a group of creatures called the Red Cliff Raiders. Go. And I thought, okay, well, that's not a lot to work off of, but it's something to work off of. And it guided me to purchase the Southlands campaign setting. And a PDF, it was like $15. I don't play Pathfinder, but it's a cool campaign setting for any edition if you're willing to work at it. And I read through like a chapter, and it took me maybe an hour. Fully a quarter of the time I spent actually designing was reading, and double checking and going back. And hey, it one got me work with Kobold Press, and two, that base of knowledge I've used what I know about the Southlands campaign setting to inform a solid percentage of everything else I've written for them. You'll look in the Creature Codex. There's a bunch of dragon creatures in the service of the Dragon Empire there, and that's all Southlands stuff.
And so I'll say that I actually worked as a judge on that contest as well, and I can tell you that what he said about it being similar to how we do the backer submissions, hi Archie, is very true. That's very true. So everything we're saying here, everything he's saying about his experience with that contest that got him work with this publisher, is absolutely applicable.
I would say Kobold does things extremely fair. They strip everybody's name off things.
Oh yeah.
And not to mention, they have some very good judges who I don't think it would matter if names were on things anyway.
Always good to be on the up and up regardless.
And also just really amazing that they are doing
There it is.
Yeah, the Book of Lairs is amazing, and is a stretch goal, right? Is a second Book of Lairs for the Creature Codex.
There are certainly a number of layers peppered about the stretch goals that are popping up here and there. So if we get enough of them, I would expect to see them compiled in some form. But I don't know how much. I don't know how much specific discussion of that there's been.
Gotcha.
If only there were a way to bind these things into one place.
Hey, speaking of getting the Book of Lairs and old stuff, there's a Humble Bundle going on the Kobold Press. Well, when this podcast comes out, maybe it won't be, but it's possible that there's a Humble Bundle going on with a bunch of Kobold Press stuff.
We'll edit this out if it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that, I mean, if it's still going on, people get on it. That bundle is insane.
Yeah.
Oh my god, it's so good. Yes, there is a battle map and lair PDFs.
Yes, there you go.
So that's what I was thinking of. Yes, yeah.
Working title.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of great stuff, and Kobold Press gives a lot of opportunities to designers. I don't really know when you all or Wolfgang Bauer sleep.
Occasionally. Occasionally.
That is just an amazing thing that they're helping the RPG community grow and everything. So I want to talk real quick with Shawn. We heard about you about Undead. What types of monsters do you like to design, James, and why?
Ooh, what type of monsters do I like to design? I think just by sheer volume of creation, I like to design dragons and dragon-adjacent creatures because they inspire creativity in me. There's just something about the freedom and power of dragons that inspires something narratively. And once I get a narrative hook, then all the mechanics flow from there. And that's just my design style. Some of you may find this useful, some of you may not. But my monster design always starts with a core theme, if I want to get really abstract, or with a core action or something like that. And it all spirals out from there. On a different track, I love doing folklore monsters, like I mentioned before. I think looking at the list of things I created for the Creature Codex, maybe about somewhere between half and 2/3 of them have some sort of folklore root. And that's just because of, again, the stories already behind them. And it's really easy with Western and European folklore to do that. I get a little less sure of myself when I move out of Europe, just because like James said, I want to make sure I get the story right. And if I do find myself doing that, like I did with a Japanese yokai, which is a spirit of some sort. It's specifically called the Jimenju, and it's got a sort of tree-like appearance. I didn't just go to Wikipedia for that one. I went to the library and I got out books. And let me stress the importance of actually getting books when it comes to researching monsters. The information on non-Western creatures, especially, that you'll find on the internet is, I'll just be honest, it's often inaccurate. Either inspired by video games and not by the original myth, or it's been misinterpreted. Stuff you'll find in books is often traced back to primary sources more easily, and thus you can be more authentic with your design.
Yeah, I think that's very true. You want to make sure, especially when you are doing a monster, that you get your information accurate, and if you're changing it for a reason, not because you read Bob's Fun Facts of Yokai on the internet.
Yeah. And it's different for, again, publishing and personal use. If you're doing something for personal use, do whatever the hell you want. If you want to be inspired by something from Japanese mythology and you want to put your own spin on it, easy, that's fine. When you're publishing it for a really broad audience, your approach has to be more measured. Because it's not just your gaming group that's reading this. It could be anyone, and they will likely have their own particular opinions and biases and even cultural viewpoints on what you're creating.
How about you, Dan? What kind of creatures do you like to
Man, So I don't know that I have any particular, to use a game term, creature type that I've been at. Certainly my work on Creature Codex is very scattershot. I mean, I've got a lot of different stuff going on. Although I did, for the first Tome of Beasts, do a lot of the higher challenge rating legendary types. I'm getting to do some more of those, so I'm doing some of the Animal Lords, some Demon Lords, that sort of fun stuff. Some of the high challenge rating, sort of high concepts. These guys rule all of these lesser things, or they're the idea behind it. But then, so after that, like when I was picking from the list for the ones that, building my wish list, basically, when Wolfgang first approached me about this, I looked at the names to see which of those jumped out at me as I haven't seen anything like that in 5th edition yet, or, ooh, what the hell is that? There were a couple of those. Some of those had some folklore roots, like a sort of vulture-ish demon fellow whose image may have been floating around on social media here and there, that has some Greek roots.
Yeah, you of course mean the Jersey Devil.
That's the one. Yeah.
Yes. Big fan of Greek diners.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely mess up some heroes. Yeah, no. So for me, it's man, if I had to pick a particular thing that's more my bag, this goes all the way back to 3rd edition. I love swarms in a way that is really not healthy and is really not good for my players. I think one of my favorite ones I ever put together was sort of a ramped up hell wasp swarm on steroids. It was a hell wasp queen swarm. So not only did it do the whole thing where it, killed or infested people and puppeted them around, but it could also slow down the rate at which it ate them from the inside out. And so they slowly learned that a bunch of people that they had been interacting with over the course of the campaign, who ultimately were manipulating them, were all essentially the same being. It was just this swarm of abyssal wasps that have been wearing all of these NPCs like Edgar suits. Oh.
Dan Dillon, that's horrifying.
I love swarms.
All right.
I may have done at least one demon swarm in this book.
That's awesome. And horrifying. So horrifying.
Yeah.
I will say, I do remember, I want to say that it was the Monster Manual 2 for 4th edition that came out. They basically took every creature type and gave it a swarm, which was really fascinating. So they were like, all right, here's a swarm of dinosaurs, here's a swarm of constructs, here's a swarm of yada yada, and they got some really bizarre, weird, and wonderful swarms. So that's a great place to go, because I'd love to see some of those updated. So before we go, there's one thing that I would like to talk about, and that is play testing your monsters.
Oh, yeah.
So again, this is a thing you would probably want to do if you're submitting a monster for publication, is go ahead and kill your players with it so that somebody else doesn't kill their players with it. Or does, if that.
Or does, depending on your goal. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Dan, why don't I start with you?
Sure.
What do you have to say about playtesting?
Do it. Do it. I've said it before. I'll say it again. It's worth its weight in gold. It's just so easy to go blind to your own bad assumptions and your biases when you're at your workspace writing a monster. When you see it in play and you see how your players interact with it, or better yet, when you see someone else run it and how their players interact with it, and you don't know, they don't have all your assumptions in your head about what you meant or how it's supposed to work. Because you got to remember, we're writing this stuff for people who are just going to be reading it for the first time. And you have to make sure that you can translate what's, the idea in your head to the page effectively for somebody else to pick it up and run it. So if you can get somebody else to play test your monster, do it. Absolutely. That's so valuable. They will find gaps that you didn't realize were there because you were just unconsciously filling them in with what you assumed you meant. Just all kinds of stuff. And then there are so many things that you just can't plan for effectively. Like, oh, this trait interacts with this thing, or if someone has cast this spell along with this thing's trait, then now we have a TPK, that sort of thing. It's that sort of stuff pops up in play that is very difficult to foresee. Certainly as you get more supplements in your game arsenal, which these days now we're really getting. We've got Xanathar's Guide is out, and that's opened up a lot of options for players. There's a lot of different things going on these days. So actually seeing how things work practically is crucial, certainly if you're going for publish.
I would say that volatile reaction thing that Dan is talking about is my number one reason why playtesting is important. 100% agree on that, because you can't predict everything every time. But the second most important thing in my mind is if you can, just by looking at the math of your creature, say that this creature is balanced, 9 times out of 10 your creature is too boring. Because the interesting abilities that these monsters have often mess with the math in ways you cannot possibly comprehend. And like, not just fire breath hitting a lot of people. It can be as simple as a flying speed. What does the ability to fly do for a monster that is mathematically balanced at CR3? And that changes completely when you add, 8 levels to your party. A flying speed on a CR3 creature is completely different than one on a CR11 creature.
Yep.
And oftentimes, unless you're super duper experienced, and then even then, the only way to figure that stuff out is to actually use the damn thing.
Yeah, Shawn, I know you always have wise words about playtesting, and you often describe the perfect and uncomfortable playtesting situation that people should put themselves in.
What I like to do is I like to do 2 playtests. One, I will run it, and then, as Dan said, get someone else to run it. The first time, it's not just for what Dan and James said is important. It's also a way to get better ideas for the monster. Because you'll be running it and you'll think that this really cool option you have is really cool, and then you realize you spring it on the players and they just yawn. Yeah. Or, as people always say, that the worst thing you could do to a player is listen to their paranoid musings. So, in any adventure I write, any monster I create, any other thing, when I'm playtesting it in that development playtest, I'm still writing that monster. I am still creating it. I'm waiting for the good idea to either hit me or hit one of my players, because I will steal from anyone equally. And then, once you go back, then you can do that final pass, hand it off to someone else, and then check out the math and check out all the other aspects of the work, be it monster or adventure or player option.
Well, I think that is really great. This has been an awesome conversation, and I could keep going. And so I will, but with a different group of Creature Codex designers next week. Thank you all so much for joining me to talk about this. I cannot wait to get my hands on this product and to see what you have all created. Before we go, where can people find you on the internet to shout praise about your monsters that have been thoroughly play-tested and vetted and researched? Let's start with you, Shawn.
You can find me on Twitter at Shawn Merwin. You can listen to my D&D podcast called Down with D&D on the Misdirected Mark Network.
And where can people find you, Dan?
Sure. I am also on the Twitter at Dan_Dillon_1. I'm on Facebook. I moderate that Gigundus Facebook group that you just spoke to Michael Long about earlier. That aired this week as well, or the week we're recording this. So if you want to talk D&D, come onto the Facebook, find Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. It's the one with over 100,000 members, and join up. We'll be happy to talk.
Yes, it's excellent. And definitely leave a post about how much you love the new Ranger and hate the original one. To get Dan's attention.
That'll be fine.
Not in a good way.
That'll be fine. That's fine. This is fine. You're a bastard.
I have to say, actually, there is a podcast, our old podcast on the Tome Show, the Roundtable. There's an excellent podcast with Dan and a guy named Skylar Esau talking about the Beastmaster Ranger as you see it in the 5th edition Player's Handbook. That will make you want to play that thing. If you are not a Ranger enthusiast, you will be. So definitely check that out and listen to that. But also torture Dan at any turn you get.
Sure. Bring it on.
And where can people find you, James?
You can find me on Twitter. I'm always on there. It is a curse. At James J. Haeck. If you can't spell it, I'll bet it'll be in the show notes. I am also the one of the moderators of the Kobold Press and Midgard campaign setting Facebook discussion group. So if you're a fan of Kobold Press, or hint, hint, at people who want to submit monsters to the Creature Codex, if you want to learn more about Midgard and the Kobold Press world and its properties, come over to that discussion group. We're all friends over there. We'd love to help you through whatever you're thinking of.
Yes.
Yeah, and I will just jump onto that a little bit, that a lot of the Kobold Press designers are on there and more than happy to answer questions and clear up confusion. If you have anything going on with Kobold Press products, we'd love to chat.
Yeah, I think you can probably find all of us there talking about Kobold stuff, which is really fun. And it's a great place to voice your concern about the 5th edition Beastmaster Ranger. So,
Yes.
And Dan can't ban you from that group.
I can't. That's true. That is true. The other one,
But
man,
if Dan slips me a $5 bill, then I can ban you from that.
This is on. The other group, I've got the wood chipper just idles, just waiting for me to fire it up.
waiting to ban people. Thanks all so much. This is awesome.
Thanks for having me on again. It's always a great time to be here, and it's great talking with you guys, Shawn and James.
Always, Deb. Thank you.
Wow, that was a great discussion with these guys. I am seriously excited about the Creature Codex. I know Kobold Press is a sponsor of this podcast, but honestly, I would be pushing this thing even if they weren't, because it is awesome and I helped contribute to it. But also, it is awesome even without my contributions, like the people who worked on this and the art. And it's just amazing. I can't wait to do our second interview about it next week and to share more monster design tips with you from some amazing designers. But in the meantime, if you want to help Tabletop Babble grow, this is episode 50 for us. You can go leave us a great review on iTunes. Even if you don't use iTunes, the iTunes algorithms are used by many podcatcher apps to rate and recommend podcasts to listeners. And if you leave us a 5-star review, I will read your review verbatim and credit you. You can make me say anything you want. Today's 5-star review comes from iBlueWizard, and it is entitled Great Discussions with Great Guests. And it reads, James talks with fellow podcasters and RPG industry titans, and everyone in between, and every conversation is unique and informative. Thanks for the great content. iBlueWizard, thank you for the great review. This was awesome. People, I want to remind you that those holidays are coming up, and if you are doing a little online shopping on Amazon or DriveThruRPG, head on over to Don'tSplitThePodcastNetwork.com. Click on the banners on the left to get there. Those are our affiliate links. Shop as you normally would once you get there, and it just throws a couple of pennies on the dollar our way and helps support this show and all of the other great Don't Split the Podcast Network shows like Game O'Clock, Venture Maidens, The DM's Deep Dive with Mike Shea, Dames and Dragons, DSPN Presents, and so much more. Go check out all the great podcasts at Don'tSplitThePodcastNetwork.com. And you can find me on Twitter at James Introcaso, and you can read all about the game design stuff I'm doing over at worldbuilderblog.me. Tabletop Babble is a show on the Don't Split the Podcast Network. Thanks to Rudy Basso for founding it with me. Our theme music, which you're listening to right now, was provided by Battle Bards. Don't forget that RPGs are like sex. Make sure you bring a lot of hand sanitizer when you go to a convention. Hey everybody, I just wanted to let you know about one more sponsor for this episode of Tabletop Babble, and that is Loot Crate. What is Loot Crate? Oh, come on, you must know Loot Crate by now. They are a way to get a monthly present from yourself for some awesome, epic nerd gear. I'm talking everything from video games to comic books to even RPG stuff. Check it out at trylootcrate.com/DSPN. That's trylootcrate.com/DSPN. Every box features 4+ items from your favorite pop culture franchises, things like Marvel, Ghostbusters, DC Comics, Dungeons and Dragons, Star Wars. There's a t-shirt every single month and collectibles, gears, figures, and more. It's a $45 value or more in every single crate. You are going to love it. And if you go right now, you can get 20% off when you use the code HOLIDAY20 at checkout. That is an awesome promotion that they are running over at Loot Crate. So definitely check that out. Try lootcrate.com/DSPN. That's trylootcrate.com/DSPN.